Us? No. So welcome everybody. Sorry to have the open shirt up here, but it's hot in in New York. Um, anyway, I'd like to first go back to the Binswanger, if you have the text, and just refer to a couple of passages that I think are very significant. If you got the drift, and this is worthy of reading twice, he's really recounting very much like Freud does in the first section of the interpretation of dreams. There is a pretext here that he is repeating and engaging in a very thorough way. So he wants to, again, go over the history of dreaming. And I found some of the references to the Presocratics particularly interesting and engaging, as well as, Goethe, some of the poets that he engaged as well. So I'm just going to go back, and of course, the presence of Kierkegaard. And those of you that don't know Soren Kierkegaard, I'm sure you've heard the name. I don't know how many have read The Sickness Unto Death, Fear and Trembling, Either or, Repetition. These are the major works that Kierkegaard, Kierkegaard had a famous saying about Hegel. Hegel figured everything else out except man. Right? He left out the real problem of the existence of us, right? In a sense, this was Kierkegaard's notion. And somehow in the existentialist tradition, Kierkegaard became known as the father of modern existentialism from his point of view, that in some ways it's from our existence, not from our essence or our essentializing tendencies that we begin. And I like this too. I think Foucault, Binswanger, most of the people here are really beginning with existence or being in the world, to use Heideggerian language, or the Dasein, the being there-ness of something. So anyway, I would like to again emphasize some of the things that Binswanger on the first page, 81. It is language that poetizes and thinks, right? Always language being privileged here in relation to image and dream. And he doesn't set up a dichotomy between image and dream, or image, more precisely, a dichotomy between image and emotion. They're together. This is very interesting. So after last week, when I was with you, got 2 weeks ago, I started having very strange dreams. And one of the dreams I had, I'll share this with you. It's not anything overtly, well, of course, it's always, somewhat sexual, but anyway, maybe my own frustration. Anyway, I wake up to this blaring sound coming from the TV, right? And announcing that we had 1 minute to live with sirens in the background, and that thermonuclear war had started, right? Then I start hearing explosions and I wake up, right? So this was a fragment of a dream in a sense. Of course, obviously, I have very heavy conflicts that I need to solve, right? That need this kind of resolution. I can read it that way too. But the image of thermonuclear war, this is not the way the world ends, not as a bang, but as a whimper, for me, ending with a bang, right? In a sense, the inversion of, as you know, the end verses of T.S. Eliot's The Hollow Men, which was a very interesting precursor to, nuclear war, if you will, that we are the hollow men, headpiece with straw, the superficiality of modernity. So anyway, all to say, image and emotion, obviously, emotionally, I was a wreck. I wanted a resolution, very angry at the same time, unresolved stuff, and then basically wanted everything to come together. So there wasn't a separation between the emotions that I'm feeling and this image of not only the mushroom cloud, but I'm really actually hearing the explosion right in the dream, right? I mean, I'm actually hearing it. So I want to make this clear, because a lot of people separate out how do you feel in your dream is a standard, psychoanalytic or therapeutic thing. How did you feel in the dream? Instead of looking at the feeling and the dream together, right? It's kind of like they separate out. Most of the therapists will separate out this distinction between image, emotion, and dream. And this is what Binswanger tries to bring together. So I'm just gonna point to a few passages, and then I'll go on to the Sartre, and we can come back around to dreaming existence in this approach, because to me, this is a bridge in French philosophy, Foucault's reading of this, from the existential, right, to the structural, but in a way that is much more interesting, the way the structuralism has been presented in the United States in many ways, right? And also, infrastructural, structural Marxism, i.e. Althusser, structural psychoanalysis. Of course, Lacan is put into this, the structure is always there. The unconscious is structured like a language. This is a crucial word that he's using, structure and subject. Whereas in Foucault, the thing is much more subjectification and that process. Yeah, if I could make a distinction here, Lacan is always trying to, and we'll get there later, in this excuse me, in this seminar, to the notion of subject and why Lacan was so emphatic about subject, right? Versus subjectivity, which was crucial to Sartre. And then, of course, Foucault's notion of subjectivation, processes that make us who we are, how we become subjected and subjectivated through our processes of being in the world. So these are very important concepts, if you will, and processes being described by this French, if you will, existential, structuralist, psychoanalytic scene. And we'll see this breaking up later in the semester when we get to the anti-Oedipus, right, in a sense, where the arms are, positioned in a very different way, these weapons. But let me just give you a couple of page numbers here in Dreaming of Existence. I mean, sometimes it's good to go to the end. So I do suggest, and this is, I was taught this, I don't buy it completely, but I had a woman friend who was a good scholar of hermeneutics, and she always wanted to promote the teleological reading of a text. Go to its conclusion and see if it's fulfilled, right? So you go to the concluding parts of a text and then. So page 103, our goal here has been to indicate the place of dreaming. This is page 103 in the Binswanger, within the context of this common foundation. But even apart from this, we may point out that dreaming and awakenedness have something else in common, just as the transition from one to another. And of course, most of you that have read René Descartes know he makes a big deal of this, both in the discourse on the method and meditations on first philosophy, right? Very important. How do we know we're not dreaming? What is the distinction between dreaming and the awakened state? Transition from one to the other is a gradual one, which is not affected by the leap character of the individual life historical decision. So the beginning of life function, and with it of dreaming, and the end of inner life history, awakenedness, lie in infinity, right? So this is the infinite that he's going to talk about. Instead of using the language of the unconscious, Binswanger uses a Hegelian Kantian language, the infinite, right? For just as we do not know where life and the dream begin, so we are, in the course of our lives, ever again reminded that it lies beyond man's powers to be the individual in the highest sense. So this is kind of very interesting, his last engagement here. Yeah, so very interesting too. And page 102, if I can go back just for a second, where a bitter disappointment causes the ground beneath our feet to give way, then later, after I've pulled myself together again, and all of us are, I think been there before, I express what happened by saying, I don't know what hit me. Right? Yeah. I had a great saying about reading Heidegger's contributions to philosophy. I felt knocked about. So I get this all the time. I feel knocked about. I think it's a great way of saying, I don't know what hit me, but you're really being knocked about, right? In a sense, right? To use Heidegger's words, Dasein is brought before its own being, right? Insofar that it is, as something happens to it, and Dasein knows neither the how nor the what of the happening. This is the basic ontological element of all dreaming. We do not know the how nor the what of the happening, right? Yep, and its relatedness to anxiety. And we're going to talk about, obviously, bad faith and anguish. in terms of this consciousness and this activity. To dream means, and this is very interesting, to dream means, page 102, I don't know what is happening to me. From the I and the me, there again emerges, to be sure, the individual, the quisque and the hekastos. In no way, however, does the individual emerge as he who makes the dream, but rather as the one for whom he knows not how the dream occurs. Very, very, yeah, very good. You like this, huh?
Really good.
Yeah, I mean, really beautiful contingency here at work. Yeah.
And there's a breakdown of the, foundational subject aspect
Yes,
relation, right?
absolutely.
Happening.
Forget Hegel on just subject object. Binswanger, Heidegger are doing it much more profoundly, in my opinion. Yeah, in terms of that destruction. Right? Okay, in no way, however, does it emerge as he who makes the dream, but rather as the one for whom he knows not how the dream occurs. And this individual is here none other than the self-same in the sense of personal numerical identity, Kant, right? Purely formal indication. And this is a section I've been going over with a group of Heideggerians, heaven help me. But anyway, they want to look at being in time in the context of formal indication now, the indicative signs, etc. Right?
Yeah.
Right? In the
Yeah.
without substance, and it is the plaything of rising and failing life. The roar of the sea, if you read this passage, it's very beautiful. It's a very poetic account of dream and existence, in my opinion. It's really very beautiful, what he does with the sea and the attachment, the analytic, type, the analytic type being holding on to the mother at all costs, the attachment, right, etc. Right? And yeah, so the brilliance of sunbathed color and shadowy night, that's Goethe when he's traveling. The sublime form of the eagle in flight, that's another thing. And the great philosophical images of Nietzsche, the birds of prey, that you see all over Beyond Good and Evil, right, etc. Right. And the chaotic heap of paper upon the floor, the splendor of a young maiden, the scent of seaweed, the corpse of a fallen bird, the powerful, terrible bird of prey, and the gentle dove. I spent, as some of you know, a little time in Gaspizet. This resonates very well. I saw fallen birds being destroyed by environmental pollution, right? I saw many, many papers, along the seashore. Yeah, yeah. The scent of seaweed is everywhere in the Canadian Gaspizet and the peninsula, etc. So anyway, very interesting. The powerful, terrible bird of prey and the gentle dove. You see this. An individual turns from mere self-identity to becoming a self or the individual, and the dreamer awakens in this unfathomable moment when he decides not only to seek to know what hit him, right, or what has thrown him about, right, but seeks also to strike into and take hold of the dynamics in these events. Himself, the moment that is, when he resolves to bring continuity or consequence into a life that rises and falls, falls and rises. Only there does he make something. That which he makes, however, is not life. This the individual cannot make, but history. Very interesting, right? The way he begins to separate this out. Very, very good. Dreaming man, to use a distinction I've drawn elsewhere, is life function. And this is very interesting, is life function. Waking, he creates life history. What he actually makes is the history of his own life, his inner life history, and we must not confuse this with participation or non-participation in outer or world history, which by no means lies completely within his power. It is not possible, no matter how often the attempt is made, to reduce both parts of the disjunction between life function and inner life history to a common denominator, because life considered as function is not the same as life considered as history. I really like this distinction. Yeah. And yet, both have a common foundation. And what is that common foundation? Existence. This is really existentialism at work in its early early formation, especially in the annals, if you will, of design analysis, and existential psychoanalysis. Existence is always already there, right? And existence, by the way, those of you who know some Latin, really means to be outstanding. You're standing out. Existence means you're standing outside. Outstanding, right? It's very interesting to hear about this, right? In a way, yeah. So if you see someone coming out of a depression, you should say outstanding, right? Yeah, it's good, yeah. So, yeah, please go ahead, Tony. Yeah.
Subjectivation that you were referring
Yeah,
to
sure,
before,
please.
and the phrase, what's that phrase? Where'd it go? Okay, the becoming a self. An individual turns from mere self-identity to becoming a self or the individual. So it's a process of subjectivation. It's
Yes.
not a state in which
Never a
you
state.
find yourself.
Yeah, never a state, but a process. Yeah. Very important to always remember that.
Yeah.
Just to go back here too, I mean, this is interesting. Very interesting too. He has the thing with Carl Jung throughout this. I don't know if you picked up on that. He wants to bring in problems that are dormant, and we'll go back to this with Lacan, page 101. I'm going backwards, but I think this is important, a kind of regressive, right? This whole notion of the transference, right? Which we will put out because this is a fundamental concept of psychoanalysis. Crucial to Lacan. Crucial to, And in fact, Lacan wrote on the transference from a phenomenological perspective. Yeah. So very interesting. We're dealing with subjective truth, as Kierkegaard would say. We're dealing with a passion of inwardness. This is a phrase of Kierkegaard, by virtue of which subjectivity must work itself through objectivity. That is the objectivity of communication, intelligibility, submission to a trans-subjective norm, and out of it again. So the third phase of our dream disclosed, and he's going back to the dream that he analyzed, right? The falling prey, the fusion with the sea, the drive for the mother, et cetera. Yeah. So only on the base of such an insight can the psychotherapist turn himself from a dreaming to a waking spirit, so that what Kierkegaard says of Lessing might be said of him. In neither accepting an unfree devotion nor recognizing an unfree imitation, he himself free enables everyone who approaches him to enter into free relation with him. And again, I'll emphasize, the Sartrean, we'll go there too, the Pact of Freedom, if you want to watch in the margins. This Pact of Freedom is very much based on this kind of a series of relations that he had with Simone de Beauvoir, by the way. Yeah. Which of course feminists went ballistic on, but anyway, it's an interesting concept. And you have to remember she's one of the brightest bulbs of her generation, and she entered into the pact. So you have to ask, what's going on here that doesn't meet the eye on the first glance. So anyway, so all of these problems are dormant, and this is interesting too, where the whole notion of transference comes in. In Freud's doctrine of transference to the doctor, and particularly in his theories about the resolution of the transference, right? In a way. And they remain dormant there because no one has yet succeeded, and no one will ever succeed, in deriving the human spirit from the drives. This is interesting, right? Because you're beginning to see this notion of Geist, again, play out against drive. It's very interesting. If you're to write an essay about this, I think one thing of doing that, again, the pencil. Yeah, the pencil, thanks. Yeah. You would be able to really be able to work out Geist versus drive, in a sense, and instincts, right? In a sense. So, yeah. So these two concepts are by their very nature incommensurable, and this incommensurability that justifies the existence of both concepts, each within its proper sphere. A deeper penetration is achieved by Jung's doctrine of individuation. So here's going to go into this, the liberation of the self from the false veils of the mask or the persona, right, on the one hand, and the suggestive force of unconscious images on the other. However deep the insights may be that Jung gains by seeing individuation as a process of psychological development, here too, the fundamental problem of individuation is concealed by the fact that the contrast between dreaming and waking, suspension in one's private world and in the common world, is not understood for what it is. The contrast between image and feeling, which always belong together. I want to emphasize this: image and feeling on the one hand, and intellect and spirit on the other. Right? Since, however, the contrast is contrast is there, it cannot wholly escape an explorer such as Jung. The attempt to derive this contrast from the compensatory function of the unconscious and its compensatory relation to consciousness is unsatisfactory in that the opposition seems to disappear from the view of the fundamental problem, gets buried within problems of detail and basic concept, especially true with respect to the notion of the collective unconscious. And again, a very good essay here: is the collective consciousness necessary as a concept, right? In a way. This was part of Freud's, debate with Jung, which is both a kind of imaginative race consciousness in Schleiermacher's sense, right? And an ethical reference to a universal, the world or the object. It is clear in the collective the contrast continues unmitigated. The same holds true for his notion of the concept of the self, in which conscious and unconscious complement each other to form a whole. Ego is supposed to contain within himself all those elements necessary for a self-regulation of the total psyche. Must be borne in mind, however, that the fundamental ethical factor, the conscience, very interesting, which is hidden, or we can say superego in this context instead of conscience, which is hidden in this compensation, first sets the entire functional dynamism in motion, and thus the total psyche is not, on the contrary, regulated by the compensation mechanisms or the compensatory mechanisms, bad translation. The problem is not furthered either by shifting it from the whole to its part. His theory draws successfully from Eastern sources, India and China, and makes good use of knowledge of primitive mentality. We, on the other hand, and this is interesting too, because you begin to see this divide between East and West going on, right? With all due respect to these sources, do not think it justified to step backwards to the Indian mythologies, to other, other Zen Buddhism, which, Marcuse had stuff to talk about in many ways, right? In psychology, psychoanalysis, and psychiatry, from the point attained by the Greeks in their interpretations of existence. So you begin to see this East-West, if you want to put it that way, or the Greek world, right?
Yeah.
In terms of the subject-object, right?
Right.
And how this is working out in many ways, inner, outer, that split, that being already presupposed by the Greek world as being part of one, right?
Right.
Yeah, go ahead. So
No,
go.
nothing.
Yeah.
We'll get there.
Yeah.
We keep going.
So this is very, 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 very interesting here. How he uses, the Presocratics. This is going to happen on the bird prey. I thought was a great section. This is on 92, right? The image of the bird of prey attacking a dove or other animal to tear it or to destroy it, an image from ancient times. And he goes through to Penelope's dream and the Odyssey. So again, you begin to see the quality of this mind at work, how deep it is, right? How much they are indoctrinated. Like it or not, Freud, and again, I say this as someone who is very anti-modern Greek, but pro-ancient Greek. Anyway, the ancient Greeks, in some senses, were so prevalent in this German educational mix, right? That, these people had an incredible background, right? Incredible background in all of this, the Latin and the Greek, and their ability to read this and read it imaginatively. As I've mentioned to you before, Sigmund Freud's brother-in-law, Bernays, not Edward Bernays, his nephew, who invented propaganda theory in the United States. Wrote the classic book 1927 on propaganda. But another Bernays, his wife's, I think his wife's brother, wrote the Goethe Prize-winning essay on Antigone in the late 19th century. So all these people were extremely, again, and I emphasize this, I'm not really saying we go back to the Greeks, although I agree with Heidegger, a serious recasting of the Presocratics is important. And I agree with Marx, maybe to reread Aristotle in that light too. It's very important. And I certainly agree with Kojève when he said to, all the radicals of 68, he said, they asked him, how do we become more radical? And he said, learn ancient Greek. So anyway, there's something here to be said about the dream awakening and what he's doing here again. Okay, so yeah, go ahead, please.
To my students because they were asking me about mental health.
Oh, you read him?
Yeah.
You guys heard this about Tony? He
Yeah.
read it to his students because they were interested in mental health.
Yeah. And I told them that this passage, right under section 2, illustrates a sort of historical enclosure of
you're on the screen.
Consciousness,
yeah.
Inside of subjectivity.
Yes.
Rather than dispersed in the world in this more, I don't know, transversal way that he describes. Yeah.
Right. So just if I can sum it up just a little bit, because I would like to introduce the Sartre tonight, but we'll go back to this, I promise you. This page 93, after he goes through a very interesting note, the Persians of Aeschylus, which should be reread in the light of the Iranian situation today. Very important play, the Persian and the Persian Empire back in the day, et cetera. The image, this is an image that happens in the Persians, in Xeres. I saw an eagle fleeing for safety to the altar of Phoebus, and from terror, my friends, I stood reft of speech. And thereupon I spied a falcon rushing at full speed with outstretched pinions and with his talons plucking at the eagle's head, while it did not but cower and yield its body to his foe. And then he goes, this image is not viewed, this is 93, as an image stemming either from a dream or an occurrence in the external world. This is very interesting. This indicates the extent to which the Greek mind, this is very important, the Greek mind effaced the boundaries, right? Effaced the boundaries between the various spaces of inner experience, external world, and cult. Yeah. This is beautiful.
It's amazing.
Right? Amazing in terms of his reading. Yeah. This is due to the fact that for the Greeks, the subject-source of the dream image, the subject of cosmic events, and the subject of the cultist pronouncement are one and the same. Very interesting, right? The Godhead Zeus, or his direct charges, to whom he has delegated his power, either temporarily or permanently. Here then, dream image, the image of the two women harnessed to the chariot, their quarreling, and Xeres' fall, the external event, the falcon and the eagle, and the cultist significance form an inseparable unity. Yeah. There are literary critics that don't even come close to approaching this kind of level of interpretation.
Yeah, for sure.
I promise you. Yeah. Right. I've been around a long time and around a lot of literary critics. You would never see this kind of synthetic activity going on. Where do we hear any talk of an individual subject, and where then is the possibility of either the ontological grounding or collapse of that individual? And who can decide here whether truth is to be sought in the innerness of subjectivity or in the outwardness of objectivity? For here, all inner is outer, right? Going back to what Tony mentioned, the subject-object dichotomy of which Western philosophy has been said. Yeah.
It's a vast world that just gets sort of collapsed into this very impoverished idea of the individual.
Yes, exactly. Yes, just as the outer is inner. And in one way, Tony brings up something very interesting. He uses the word impoverished individual. The amazing thing about the existential Dasein analytic, if you will, and their approach to analytic, is they have tremendous respect for the wholeness of the human being, the possibilities of the human being. It is never never seen as an impotence or as something like that. It's always thought of, to use our friend Bruno Gouli's term he likes so much, potential, potentialia. Yeah, in a way. That's what we are. And, to go back to the great Kantian phrase, potentiality is higher than actuality, or possibility is higher than actuality, which we always forget in revolutionary circles because we're cynical and we're too smart for our own good, right? In many ways. Yeah. We don't really think of possibility anymore. Right? We think about how clever we can be of our analysis in actuality. Now, I'm not trying to be idealist here. I think this is very interesting the way he's bridging things. And he goes to the Odyssey, book 15. So anyway, I won't go through all of this, but very, very interesting in terms of image, dream and existence all at once, right? In a sense, and emotion. Right? And I want to put that in too. No accident, again, that Sartre wrote a book on the theory of the emotions too. And what I really like about that book is that he says, ultimately, we choose to be depressed. I mean, this is a monster. No, I understand, Josh. I understand very well. Sartre was a monster when it came to this. Very intolerant of, yeah. You know the story about Giacometti, who was his good friend, Alberto Giacometti. Giacometti saw Sartre on the street one day, and Giacometti had been hit by a car. He said, I had never felt alive until that day. And Sartre says, there's something wrong with you, and walked away. You mean you haven't felt your existence until you got hit by a car? Right? Anyway. Yeah. So just a little bit of an anecdote. So anyway, any thoughts about this from you guys? There's also a great section on Heraclitus and divination, right? And another beautiful passage here. And he mentions a scholar of Parmenides, someone totally forgotten today, Karl Reinhardt. I have some of Reinhardt's books, amazing figure in the history of philosophy. Again, this Germanic mind at work. I'm not trying to make it into something more than it is, but you can see the depth, the significance, the scope of this learning that really went on, right, in many ways. Yeah. So in some ways, yeah. No accident that the first PhD program in the United States at Johns Hopkins was built on the German model. Right. Very, very interesting in that regard. Any thoughts, Patrick? You just unmuted. Yeah.
I mean, I read this and it brought to mind Lukács's theory of the novel, the first chapter.
Interesting.
Which, provide, it, I mean, in the same way that Binswanger is using this as a kind of a reference point, Lukács uses the Greeks, pre-Socratic Greeks, to paint an image of a world which resolves all tension, all contradiction, and so it's.
And I mean, the epic form, right?
The epic form in terms of.
Right. This is an early part of Lukács's work. I'm really glad that Patrick brought up Lukács because Lukács really started out as a Kierkegaardian.
Mm-hmm.
His book on the soul and its forms is really an attempt to look at Kierkegaard, and in some ways his relationship with Ernest Schniedler, his woman at that time, was really based on a kind of Regina Olsen, which the Kierkegaard wrote either or, either I'm going to marry you or I'm not, and why I'm not going to marry you, in a sense. So he had this thing, soul in its forms, and then the second part of this was, of course, the theory of the novel that Patrick brought up, which is really a theory of forms, right? Mm-hmm. It's really a theory of forms, the form of the novel. What is the novel? How is it? And he begins that the Greeks really had this notion of resoluteness in the epic form. So this is all, I guess, again, part of this, wonderful educational system, if you will, that was really based on bringing things together, synthetic mind at work, right? But not in a false way, not in a fragmented way, not, in a sense. So, and then after this, of course, he goes on to the culmination of the trilogy, History and Class Consciousness. where he begins to,
But
yeah,
carrying that in terms of
yeah,
the dialectic of enlightenment and the discussion of Greek classic culture. Once again, the epic, and very different, and I mean, here they see the beginning of this split, this cleavage that ruptures the world. Trace it back to the Greeks
yeah,
in some sense.
right. This is the first chapter on Odysseus, by the way.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The hero, right? In a sense, right? Yeah, very much so. By the way, I mean, those of you that study literature, remember the voyage of Ulysses, or basically Odysseus, home is 20 years.
Yeah.
By the time we get to Joyce, it's one day in the life of Leopold Bloom. This is how time has been compressed, right? In terms of the history of the novelist form, right? In a way, yeah, yeah. This is in the 1920s. Yeah. So you see this,
Right.
and yeah, and you can begin to and Patrick's right. This is written 44, published 1947, right? And again, as most of you know, listening sometimes in these seminars, I mean, I really love the thing Juliet or Enlightenment. That chapter of that book, I think that's a very prescient moment for today. Very, very significant in terms of what's going on. Yeah, and I was thinking maybe I would add to the reading the Adorno piece on Freud itself. We can discuss Marcuse's attempt, but really Adorno in some ways begins to see Freud in, I think, a very deeper way in some senses, even though Marcuse's intention is to rewrite Freud through Marxian categories such as surplus, repression, desublimation, these kind of things, repressive desublimation, etc. So yeah, great, Patrick. Yeah, no, this is good. So Lukács in the I think theory of the novel is around the late 1919 or 1920, 2, 3 years before History and Class Consciousness, before the revolution, I think. And Soul form predates that in terms of the Kierkegaardian moment. Right? Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think we need a Lukács Renaissance, in a lot of ways, because this was one of the great minds of the 20th century, probably the most original Marxist thinker in terms of relationships to German classical philosophy. And unfortunately, the Althusserians put him to rest. Nobody really read him in the Althusserian camp. He's been taken up by some people. Andrew Feenberg, of course, early on. Jay Bernstein wrote a very good book early, I think his best book on the philosophy of the novel, who does work on Adorno now at the New School. But anyway, yeah, I'm really much there. But you can see this evolving, and in some ways, as I mentioned, Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain, Nafta, the character, is very much like the Lukácsian dialectical mind in The Magic Mountain versus the more humanistic Settembrini. Yeah, so it's kind of interesting to see that play out too in the epic novel, if you will. And Mann and Lukács, of course, knew each other. Yeah, they came from the same class. This is very interesting. Mann, came from senators and upper class politicians, and Lukács was the son of a banker. Yeah. When he had to escape Hungary, he called his father's limousine driver to get out of town, to get out of Budapest. Right. He didn't call Phil. Phil was preoccupied in Salvador. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. So anyway, speaking of time capsules. Yeah. So anyway, yeah. Good. Yeah. And I mean, of course, look, one of the great essays of Lukács too, since Patrick opened this up, is Goethe and his age. This guy kind of gives you this background on what German Romanticism, this desire to go home, the Hölderlin, as the poet, Goethe as the other poet, right? What was happening. Kleist, we'll discuss this with Anti-Oedipus maybe in a way, that von Kleist in the Marionette Theater, and especially in Penthesilea, is an attempt to break up the thinkers of state, as Deleuze and Guattari call both Hegel and Goethe.
Mhm.
So we can speak about that later on and kind of take this up too. So anyway, so yeah. So any other thoughts about this? I know I'm really glad you brought up these two texts. Theory of the Novel. I tried to teach it. I did, somewhat of a, good job, but it didn't really take hold with a class on politics through literature. Yeah, but yeah, the first section is really worth reading. Yeah, yeah, in many ways. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Have you heard of or know of Konstantinos Kavallakos? He teaches, I think, in Athens. He's written,
Stathis Kouvalikis?
yeah,
Stathis? Yeah, I know Stathis. Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
He's written extensively on Lukács. So it's interesting stuff because it ties it back to neo-Kantianism in terms of the debates back then.
No, that's true. He wrote a very good book on philosophy and revolution and the Merz movement,
hmm,
along with the time of the manifesto too.
yeah.
Yeah, very good book, Stathis Kouvalikis. Yeah. He left England. He lived in Paris. He used to commute to England to teach, and I guess yes, he is back in England. Right? I mean, in Athens right now. Yeah, yeah, yeah. A political family too. Another one that came out of a political family. Yeah, the Kouvalikis group. Yeah, you're talking about Stathis, right? Stathis.
Um, no,
Okay, someone else. Okay.
it's K. I mean, the last name is Kavoulakos,
And his first,
and
I'm sorry?
his first name is Konstantinos.
Okay.
And it's I got the German here. I'm just trying to translate it.
It's written in German, most of his book.
Well, a lot of his stuff has been written in German. The aesthetic cultural critique and ethical utopia, George Lukács's neo-Kantian early work. It's a book
Okay.
published in 2014. He has published one in English, and I'm trying to find a reference to that. I have a copy. I've read the book. It's very good.
Okay. It's Kalanikos is his name, or?
I'll spell it again.
Yeah, okay.
Kavoulakos.
Okay.
And the English translation of the book, which is the 2014, Andy Feenberg writes the introduction to.
Oh, yeah, okay. I
Yeah,
got it. I see who he is. Yes, I know who this person is. I have not read the book. Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So his books are available on Amazon. There's a book, there's actually a good review of his work called Ruptured Formalism,
Hmm.
the challenge of yeah, bioethics and more. Yeah, this is interesting. Okay. Yeah, yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
I'm totally fucked.
Yeah. I was thinking of Stathis
Sorry, I don't
Kuva
know. I
like.
would never.
Yeah, yeah, good. And he goes back to the neo-Kantian roots of Lukács.
Yeah, he does.
Interesting. Okay.
Rickert, Lask, Rickert, and he goes through a fairly detailed analysis.
And
So,
and Zimmel as well, or not?
yeah, Zimmel's mentioned, but it's mostly, the Heidelberg
Right.
school
Yeah. Okay.
and Emil Lask are the pivotal
Lask.
figures.
Yeah. Interesting.
So, yeah.
Okay. No, great. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah. Yeah. Well, Lukács had had a very a privileged education, to put it mildly. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I've got to go help my wife. She says she's totally screwed something up. Anyway,
Okay. No problem.
I'll
Okay.
be back. I'll be back.
Yeah, we'll wait for you. Yes, we'll be here. Right. Okay. Good. So, Tony, any other comments or any comments about this piece of Binswanger? We'll go back to it, I promise you. I mean, I'll be rereading. You know, what I do, how I work is to reread, as much as I can. When we go back. Yeah, Tony, yeah,
Well,
please.
maybe
Yeah.
we should, I know you just said we're going to start now, but
No, it's okay. Yeah.
95 is really
Yes.
the banger, where he picks up Heraclitus again.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. While dreams themselves belong completely to the aspect of night in the Greek design. And remember, this is historicity in the phenomenological. You look at the design of a period. What was there being there-ness, right? Instead of historical materialism, which already has pre-concepts, forces, relations of production, right? Modes of production, as you well know, all of these things that go forward in terms of the historicity from the Heideggerian Binswangerian method Boss all the way forward in some ways, and it's a rich history, I think, is to look at the design. So the cultist interpretation of dreams, and then he goes to the oracle, right? The oracle, right? Was gradually withdrawn from the sphere of influence of Gaia, the old godhead of earth and closely related to night, the ancient Delphic inspirational mantic, and was usurped by the new god, Phoebus Apollo. And most of that that part of the Socrates' death was because of allegiance to Apollo, right? In a sense, no longer to Gaia, right? Very interesting, right? Going on. So the dream of Atossa and the omen of falcon and eagle are not distinguished according to inner and outer or subjective and objective events, but rather with a regard to the close at hand, and you could substitute there the ready to hand in the Heideggerian sense, right? Constrictive, dark, damp, and obscure realm of night. And the realm of the most awake of all gods, the sun god Apollo, who sees and aims so clearly into the distance. Very interesting. Yeah, go ahead, please. Yeah.
The problem with the subject object is not that you have a subject and an object, I guess, is sort of what he's saying. It's that you have a duality, right? And and when he replaces it with dark and light, then you get gradients between dark and light rather than this sort of rigid, either the subjective or the other.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's take a look. We know, however, that along with its grandly uniform religious worldview, and if you want to make I have no idea about your scholarly ambitions, of course, but anyway, Burckhardt's great book on Greek religion, another German of this period. Anyway. And anyway, we know that along with its grandly uniform religious worldview, there was a place for sober, empirical observation and for the scientific theory that rested upon it. But above all, we know too of their philosophical, metaphysical interpretation of the world as an organic structure. This is very beautiful recapping of the pre-Socratic moment, in my opinion, of the organic structure of cosmic events linked together from the most universal down to the most individual and apparently accidental. In his polemic against prophetic dreams, Cicero cites these three conceptions as possibilities for explaining prophetic signs in dreams, and then proceeds to attack all three possibilities, and with them, the whole notion of dream prophecy, with which we today concur. He cites divination, right, the possibility of inspiration by divine powers, convenientia and conjunctio natura, and quam vocam, right, by convenient, and the conjunction with nature, convenience, etc., and by enduring persistent observation of the coincidence of dream experience with actual events. The new element, which he acquaints it, is the doctrine of sympathy. And this is very interesting. And again, and one thing why I hold on to philosophy, there are still many mysteries and revelations that we need to get to, right, in a sense. The doctrines sometimes really yield something very profound, in a sense. Yeah, in a way. Anyway, and vulgar materialism takes away from this. Not good materialism, but vulgar materialism. The new element with which he acquaints us is the doctrine of sympathy. This, however, is a doctrine we find in Heraclitus. Interesting, the sympathia, right? Yeah. The Stoics, particularly Posidonius, and later in a different form in Plotinus, who is the great reader, if you will, of Plato, right? The great reader. The Iliad is very important. Albert Camus, by the way, wrote his dissertation on Plotinus, and Plotinus, the notion of the différent and différence is already in book 5 of the Iliad, where Derrida, Deleuze have capitalized on. The Platonian doctrine of difference is already playing out in many ways. Okay, so, and again in the important dream book of Synesius, in the famous philosophical doctrine of the one, and you can see where Foucault would like this, because there's this journey, right, back into, and remember the second volume of the history of sexuality, the uses of pleasure, goes back to this Greek world in terms of nutritions, right, etc. Yeah. Okay, so very, very important. We later encounter the spirit of ancient Greece. There are various, right, the doctrine of the one, right? There are various subforms of the doctrine in Heraclitus's, um, um, following Karl Reinhardt, the book I just mentioned, Cosmos and Sympathy, which is a oneness of being in the sense of en, nigh, pan, right? All being, all pan being, right? The oneness and its divisions, discord and harmony, right? Or as Posidonius later formulates, of matter and spirit, nature and God, the accidental and the predestined, right? So he's showing pretty amazing, huh?
Yeah.
From this, we will have to distinguish again the all one or oneness, and this is a reading of Parmenides in a very profound way, and also Heraclitus, something that, to my mind, still the most powerful reading of this is Heidegger in the Introduction to Metaphysics. Yeah, this resolution of being and becoming, right? An attempt to do that. So, in the sense of eton pan, the magical union of the forces of drawing and calling towards, of the open and the hidden, the cultic and the philosophical evocation of the flow from phenomena to phenomena, such as we find today even in superstition, and particularly in dream superstitions of all circles of society. Whereas the religious mythology and philosophy of the early Greeks recognized as only a harmonious order of cosmos or world, we find already in Posidonius a purely dynamistic worldview in place of the notion of which we find the notion of an explicative, natural, and yet secret and mysterious force. A notion that is still reflected in much of present-day scientific and philosophical theory. Among the Greeks and the Romans, all this was mirrored in the interpretation of dreams until, upon the collapse of the old world, and as an unmistakable sign of collapse, Petronius, the fine and free-spirited confidant of Nero, you guys know the Satyricon, huh? The work of Petronius and scornfully explained that it was not the institutions or commands of the gods that sent man dreams from heaven above, but that every man made them himself. And this is from Petronius. Dreams, the fleeting shadow play that mocks the mind, issue from no temples, no heavenly power sends them. Each man creates his own. So just as Lucretius, going back to the materialist tradition, before him presented a highly realistic account of the relation between dream experiences and daily activities, fears, wishes, and sexual desires. So Petronius put his finger on the most important aspect of modern dream theory. Each man creates his own, right? Here, not only the history of the problem of dreams, but history itself reveals the pause, the caesura between the ancient and the modern, the hybris of individuation, right? The all-powerful and godlike, human individual rears his head within the context of this unnatural elevation of man, in contrast to the all of the Greek world of forms, in which the natural laws of man unfold in all directions. We should glance to his own particular problem. Again, dream in existence. So he opens this up. Did you want to comment on this since you mentioned it?
That answers the sort of Marxist objection that this would just be a simple idealism or
Absolutely.
mysticism. This answers it right there.
Absolutely.
Like, no, this is still historical, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Totally historical. Yeah, in so many ways. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, this is a very beautiful, I mean, again, something we could spend 5 weeks on. I know we don't have time and, et cetera. But again, a very beautiful part of this thing. And you can see why Freud liked him so much. Yeah, too, that there is this combination of real openness, right, to the Greek and Roman world, which Freud, again, had a great affection towards, right, in a way. Yeah. So, and then he goes on, the communal, page 98, this is also very important. The koinon, or the xenon, that is the communal, right? The koinonia, right? If you know, the community comes from this word, right? In Greek. And the singular, particular, and private, the idion, especially Reinhardt, again, the Parmenides, which I really recommend if you can get it in English, if you're interested in this kind of stuff. The original philosophical document is the story of a kidnapping, right? The taking away of those to whom the secrets of the night will be unveiled, right? In a way. And the whole movement, since we're going to be going into being in nothingness, of being in nothingness. This title goes back to Parmenides, obviously, right? And the Parmenidean form, right?
Nothing cannot be. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and the private, right? Especially instructed is the relation to Hegel, especially in his history of philosophy. Naturally, here we can only skim over the fundamental thought. Excuse me. The explanation of Heraclitus's Fragment 89, the modern psychology of thought in terms of his own analysis of dreams and song in Greek and now time, which I elucidated the double meaning of this fragment, namely that and why we have our very own world in the dream and why we turn ourselves towards it, right? Why we have our world in the dream. And again, another thing that's interesting is this use of the word world, Welt. Very, very important. And again, German philosophy, particularly the rewriting of philosophy by Heidegger and others. Yeah. And Schopenhauer before him, the world is representation of will. But Welt, very important. The Umwelt, the Midwelt, right? All of which where we're living today. Yeah. Worlding. Yeah. If you think of being as a participle, right? Always in process. Yeah. Always in process. So then he goes into cosmos and thought. So again, I think this is a brilliant, both etymologically and imaginative connections. Again, as Tony mentioned earlier, between the breakdown of the subject-object dichotomy. Right? Right. And we're seeing the subject-object dichotomy coming back with AI. This is absolutely true. This is a return to a kind of banal Cartesianism.
Yeah.
In so many ways, right? This is, again, what Heidegger really was pointing out about cybernetics, the age of the world picture, right? Right? If you really think about this deeply, right? In a sense, right? Yeah. What is called thinking, how we don't really think in terms of communication, right?
It's interesting that he sees all this as a therapeutic we're talking.
Totally
Yeah,
therapeutic.
yeah.
I feel better
I
already.
do too.
I
yeah.
feel my
That's why I
my
read-
chest expanding again.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
That's why I read it to my students.
Right.
I
Good.
think,
Cool.
yeah.
No, it's very therapeutic.
Yeah, yeah.
It's very interesting when you begin to put this together. And in a way, in some ways, it is a kind of natura, natura,
Yeah.
nature, nature, and in the
Right.
Spinoza sense
Right.
of oneness.
Yeah.
And the whole pantheistic controversy that went on in German philosophy too,
Mhm.
between Schelling and Hegel, right?
Mhm.
Goethe and Kleist, which is always worth recounting in many ways. Yeah, yeah. So anyway, let me. We have about 50 minutes or maybe an hour. Let me. I'm going to go on. I mean, I'll hear from you, but I think that the crucial thing here is to be able to see both life function and life history together. Right? This is something that needs to be thought synthetically together. Right? Yeah. They come together. This is where I began here to use a distinction is both. Right? Is life function, right? And waking, he creates life history, right? Very important. Very interesting in terms of a praxis, if you want to call it this. I'll write this down for future reference. A praxis of dreaming, right? Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. If you want to think this through too, as a maybe new term we could use
Yeah.
going forward, for our students and for transmission purposes, right? Yeah. So any thoughts about this? Again, this is brilliant stuff. I mean, again, I suggest if you have the time, you can go back and read this again and in this light and see it both his historical situatedness, 1930, how important this is, and also then to look at Foucault's attempt again to phenomenologically look at image, right? Existence
Yeah.
and dream, right? And the absolute moment
Mhm.
that's crucial here, right? Yeah. And, yeah. So any thoughts from the gallery there or whatever
The Zoom gallery.
yeah.
Just that Beryl apologizes. She's got technical difficulties again, and she's asked me to summarize this conversation for her.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, good, Leslie. You're on
Good.
the spot. Yeah, that's
Come
good.
on, everybody.
That's good. That's cool. Okay, good. All right. Well, yeah, I mean, we're trying to go over the background here, the relationship of the ancient Greek world, particularly the Presocratics. You notice he never mentions Aristotle, which is where Freud begins, by the way, if you read the interpretation of dreams in the Oneiric, right? And that history. Binswanger is going deeper, to my opinion, into the Presocratics in a way. Yeah. And that may be a difference in some ways between the structural approach to therapy and this kind of more openness towards oneness and uh, trying to break up the dualisms that have existed, such as eros and thanatos,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, such as
Or image and emotion.
image and emotion is very important to see as a thing.
Yeah. Great.
I'll try my best. Hopefully, I'll feel better this weekend. I'll try my best to summarize some of this for Beryl too. Yeah,
So it's being
yeah.
recorded.
It's being recorded too, as we know, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Again,
is it
yeah.
actually posted? They're posted every week?
Josh is going to post everything. We've had this is the fifth session. This will be the fourth one to be posted. One time I forgot to record. Yeah, but
That's
yeah.
wonderful.
I,
Yeah,
I
that's
did
great.
I'm forgetting of the slip of the mind, if you will. Yeah, yeah. Back then, yeah. But I hope you try to understand what he's doing here. And to me, the crucial part of this that we'll take up later is this notion of transference, right? Very, very important because this is going to be one of the four fundamental concepts of psychoanalysis, according to Lacan and of course to Freud and also in the whole tradition. Patrick's probably aware of this in the 80s and the 90s. There was a philosopher from the University of Pittsburgh, Adolf Grunbaum, who said psychoanalysis has no empirical verification. The transference cannot be empirically verifiable. Well, that may be true, but who cares? in a sense. Yeah, yeah, in some ways, yeah. And yeah. The empirical verification is that little Hans jumped on Freud's lap and yelled "Daddy," right? Right, in a sense, in the section. That's one empirical verification here. I won't get into more of the transference right now, but anyway, yeah. And the countertransference, which is very important. Yeah, very important. Yeah. So yeah. So, I mean, any thoughts? Again, this is, I hope, for me, I'm amazed, and I've been through this many years. I'm still amazed by the depth of the learning here and their ability to go back to classic works. I mean, I'll tell you a story. It's kind of a funny story. I had a friend, his name was Sam Attard. Little anecdote here about the classics. And he was a student at the New School, very Hegelian idealist, but a great guy. He worked in computers down on Wall Street did data systems or whatever, but he continued his study, and I think he finally got his PhD at the New School. Anyway, he was very fond. He was a student of Hannah Arendt in the beginning, and he asked Arendt, what he should be reading. She said, "You will be educated when you've read all the Loeb classical books." So every time you would see Sam, after that moment, he would say, "I'm up to volume 21. I have 29 to go." So he's reading Cicero, the Latin on the one side, the Aristotle's rhetoric, all of these things that are part of the Harvard Loeb classics, right? Again, Loeb being the name of another Jewish investment banking house on Wall Street, right, who supported this in a way. Yeah. Trump is going to support worldwide wrestling, as you know. That's what we've deteriorated to. The White House, yeah. I mean, it is really sad what's going on in this country. It's beyond sadness. Yeah, where we are. We don't have categories for this yet.
No.
Parodic is not good. Pastiche is not good. We've had tragedy, farce, pastiche, right?
Yeah.
We don't have category yet for what this is. Atrocity exhibition, Ballard had that great metaphor, but it's very difficult to figure out what kind of form this really is. Yeah, ultimately. Yeah.
I was just in DC, and it's
It's what?
living hell in DC right now. I was
Yeah,
just
living hell. Oh, you were there, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, what did you do?
Yeah.
I had to go to Union Station. My sister lives outside DC, so
Yeah.
she picked me up.
In Virginia or
Yeah,
Maryland?
Virginia.
Which part? Alexandria?
Springfield.
Springfield, okay.
Also a different kind of hell.
No, it's something. Speaking of Nero and Petroni, I mean, this is nothing compared to
Yeah.
I mean, what happened back then is nothing.
Yeah.
Nero and the Caligula, etc.
Yeah.
This is complete insanity what we're going through. Yeah. Complete. Yeah. So anyway. So again, I can go back to this. I'll try to, I guess, make it a little more concrete. But again, I think there's a lot to be learned here, from the pre-Socratics. Part of the problem of Western philosophy, I'm beginning to think this, is the notion of mind dominating everything. And this has really set up Western philosophy towards monotheism and other things too. And I'm trying to think this through. I've been rereading the great book by Bruno Snell, another, German, The Discovery of Mind, which should be, critical, crucial reading in any kind of pedagogical thing. Where did the mind come from? Where did the intellect come from? How was it discovered? How did it play out in history? This is very important. You have to remember, again, we're educated to a degree, but nothing like this where the questions were really incredibly radical, Yeah. So anyway,
What's the book you just said? Schnell?
the Discovery of Mind, Bruno Snell is his name. Yeah, Bruno Snell. Yeah. Another German. 1947, I think he wrote it. And it's in a Dover paperback, that you can get. Yeah, yeah. It's on the concept of nous, N-O-U-S, and in Greek. Neomicron, sigma. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So anyway, I hope this helped in some ways, at least get us started. If you think about existence as being standing out, outstanding, that you're outstanding always, you're not just located as an essence in space and time. You're always standing out. The ek is very important. And of course, the temporality as well. We can talk about that more too, the ecstasis, right? In a sense. Yeah. And this is also part of the discovery, the ecstasis, right? As well as we say eureka, we say brainstorming, we have these stupid phrases, but really, in a way, this discovery, the alethological in the Heideggerian sense, the uncovering, etc., right? And in some ways, pushing aside our standard forms of analysis too, right? That are really very, very, to go back to what Patrick knows very well, it's a kind of neo-Kantian problematic that we still operate under. The analytic and synthetic distinctions. These are things that are still happening in the mind and the discovery of the mind. Yeah, yeah. So anyway. So I wish after these two pieces, and I would also read Forrest Williams. He's very good on the critique of Freud in the introduction here. Forrest Williams is a professor of philosophy who was in Colorado for years, and he's very good in this section in the preface, right? Yeah, yeah. This notion of drive, which Binswanger is taking on. He is taking on. The phenomenological tradition sees drives as secondary, not primary, right? Yeah, yeah. Primary and secondary processes are not primary and secondary processes to the phenomenologist, right? The tree, yeah, etc. So we'll go back over that too. I hope to be able to tie a lot of this together, or at least interconnect some of it. Yeah, yeah. So anyway, you want to go on to Sartre for about 40 minutes? I'm game. Yeah. Did you have a chance to look at it yet, or it's a major philosophical work, one that he disowned, Sean, in his Marxist phase. He said it was the work of a bourgeois philosopher. Right? Right? Can you imagine? Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a complete assault on the bourgeois mentality. But anyway, at the same time, he dismissed it later in his life, and he said the only book of that period you should be reading is Nausea. Right? The 1938 novella, which is the story of most of you read Nausea? Long time ago. Okay. Great novella.
Yeah.
A masterpiece. Right. The Self-Taught Man and Roquentin.
Yeah.
Roquentin is the hero. The name of the hero is a play on Quentin Compson from The Sound and the Fury. Sartre wanted the title Nausea, Melancholy, but the publisher says that's not going to sell. So they came up with Nausea instead. La Nausea, right? Anyway, so yeah, pretty amazing figure many ways. Probably the exemplary philosopher who lived his philosophy in the 20th century, right? And in many ways. And, existentialism, of course, was criticized by Lukács and by Marcuse in particular. Sartre and Adorno has many mentions, of course, in the negative dialectics, but I think they don't really do justice to the clarity of the psychological mind that is working here. Maybe philosophically there's something to be desired, but the psychologist Sartre is really what we're interested in here. So I chose sections, here of the book. And again, Richmond's introduction, very good if you can get a copy of this. It's in big print too, with a very good glossary, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, shit. You don't have a glossary.
No.
No, it has a beautiful glossary too, with the terminologies. etc. No, Hazel Barnes, she got over, she did her thing, but
There's like some terminology on 7 days.
you have some of the terminology?
Yeah,
Okay.
but it's not.
Okay. All right. So what we're going to read here again, first of all, the book is really he calls an exercise in phenomenological ontology. He's trying to merge the phenomenological method of Husserlian, the art of reduction, the suspension of our natural standpoints in order to gather and grasp the things in themselves in a better way. And at the same time, he wants to go to the Heideggerian in terms of building a philosophy of existence as well, right? So both intentionality and the philosophy of existence is operative in this book and trying to come together. The section I want us to read and read, carefully, the beginning section, is part one, chapter 2, called Bad Faith. And the question is the problem of nothingness, right? And yeah, we'll go over that. But I want us to look at bad faith, and what is bad faith? What relationship does it have to the therapeutic milieu, to mental health, and these kind of things? And what relationship does it have to existence, right? Right? So very, very important section here in chapter 2, bad faith. And he'll go through many examples. I don't know if Josh, I know you've read it, if you want to talk about it a little bit. The other sections we're going to read are being and doing freedom. I want us to read the section, chapter 1, part 4, to have, to do, and to be. And this will be freedom and responsibility. I put this out in the email. This will be the section on freedom and responsibility. And then, of course, doing and having, to do and to have, existential psychoanalysis, which is his project. And a project I think should be merged with or engaged somewhat with things. Yeah. Sorry, I'm going to turn off the phone. Yeah. So.
Nice ringer.
It's Mr. Spam. Okay. Good.
Michael,
Thank goodness it was Mr. Spam.
You have a pencil sharpener?
Yeah, sure, you can use this. Yeah. So that's what I would like to do. I don't know if you want to go into bad faith. It's a crucial term of Sartre in French. It's you break it down, mauvais foi, faith, right? And Sartre used this most of his life in some ways. He also talked about bonne foi, right? And in fact, when he visited the Heidegger mine, he visited Andreas Vodker in jail in the 70s. He said he acted in good faith when he was asked by an interviewer what they talked about. So the Heidegger Meinhof gang acted in good faith. They were true to their principles and true to their, being that moment, right? And remember, Sartre, these are people. They didn't talk about Che Guevara. They met him. they traveled. Fidel Castro, right? These were people of the world. When the Black Panthers went to exile in Paris, they did not go to see Jacques Derrida or, for that matter, Michel Foucault. They went to see Jean-Paul Sartre. So this was truly a revolutionary philosopher in terms of everyday, right? The headquarters was a cafe. I've been there many times, Café du Magot in Paris. André Breton of the Surrealists had Café Figaro, and that was the battleground between the Surrealists and the Existentialists back in the day, right? Very interesting how they cornered cafes, right, etc. Sartre's apartment, as you know, was bombed, by pro-French during the Algerian conflict. So this is a man who lived it too, right? Very much so. He spent, I think, about 3 years. It was a kind of privileged moment. He was not fit for service because of his eyesight, but he was in a German camp, a POW, a Stalag, and he spent time there. During that time, he certainly started to craft and think through being and nothingness, which was completed in 1943. He also wrote plays that, in some ways were pretty obvious critiques of the Nazi regime and of Vichy. So, this was a person of a lot of courage, at least intellectual and moral courage during the time. He never fought on the front lines like some of his generation said, oh, Sartre never picked up a gun, like they did. I heard this from a philosopher named Michel Henry. But anyway, pretty amazing figure. After World War II, as everybody knows, he started the journal Temps Moderne, which was probably the great organ of, thought and action in the world. That was its intention. And the other people on the masthead were Maurice Merleau-Ponty, Simone de Beauvoir, Jean Paul, and André Gortz. All of them had a lot of clout in their own way, but the Sartrean circle was kind of being, created during that period. And I think that most of the attacks post-World War II, that generation, were really against Sartre as being the father figure of French, philosophical thought, French action, etc. So the killing of the father took place through the structuralists, through the new novel people such as Robespierre. Everybody was up against him in a certain way. But he held his own. He wrote The Critique of Dialectical Reason, and until his death, he was working on the study of Gustave Flaubert, which was his attempt to bridge Marxism and existentialism in an attempt to look at existential psychoanalysis. So for me, the ambition, the ability of this figure to do what he did, he was certainly a writing machine. I think his insight into human beings, he had a passionate interest, not in metaphysics, not in the Presocratics, not in ancient philosophy, but a passionate interest of what motivates us, right? This is really part of his, his genius, if you will, in many ways, right? Yeah, yeah. So, yeah. And again, I think his time has been, there's still Sartrean societies and people that do it. Those of you that were present during the critique, when we did the critique, Bob Stone came, who was part of the American Sartre Society, who's written a couple of good books on Sartre, on the ethics of Sartre. And so we had him as a guest, as you remember. And speaking of thermonuclear war, this was one of Sartre's major concerns in the 1960s of what's going on. And, I had a good talk with my friend, John Clark, environmental philosopher. Some people know him in this room. It seems to me we have three distinct enemies on a grand scale. One, of course, is the possibility of thermonuclear war. Always already there. Between Trump and the more hawkish people in the Kremlin, this is a very real possibility at some levels. What's going on? Or Netanyahu and the hawkish tendencies in Moscow and the Kremlin. Number one. Number two, certainly climate change. Ecocide is here. It's going to be disastrous with data farms, etc. And this, of course, is connected to what I consider the third most pressing problem. It's not going to go away, so we can't be Luddites, but artificial intelligence, AI. Trillions of dollars are in AI right now. Trillions, not billions, trillions of dollars are now in the investment of building this up into something. So remember, we're only 90 years since the invention of the Turing machine, 1936, right? 1936, to give you an idea how rapid this is. And no telling what else is on the drawing board. I remember an interview with the president of Intel, one of its founders, Andrew Grove, right? When he said, we can only let technology out, we have enough to completely control the world. He says we can only let it out in drips and drabs, right? Only a little bit at a time, because it will shock people to what we really have the capacity for at this point. So these are really three major areas for today. Sartre, of course, lived during the period of nuclear war. I, of course, have a special affection for Cuba. When I was growing up, it was during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I was in New Orleans. And, of course, Oswald was also in New Orleans, the Kennedy conspiracy. So I turned pro-Cuba very early in my American, Zation processes and never gave up. And of course, today I'm very frightened of what's not only going on there, but what could happen. So yeah, in many ways. I mean, Narco Rubio at work, right? Who may be our next president, Narco Rubio. I think that's what's, yeah. I mean, yeah. So in some ways, and yeah. So, but to go to Sartre, this category, and one of the reasons I chose this is because he does really take up the Binswangerian Metterboss design analysis, and you can begin to see a progression, if you will, from design analysis, which is Metterboss, just to give you the names, right? Binswanger, of course, who we've read. Two of the leading people here. There are other ones too. Yeah. Henri Ellenberg. All seminal figures in this movement. Two, right? Existential psychoanalysis. If I can do the filiations here, or if you will, the constellation of mind. This is proposed in 1943, taken up by Lang and Cooper of the anti-psychiatry movements in particular, right? In my opinion, R.D. Lang and David Cooper in England in the Tavistock schools. So this becomes a very, very essential moment in terms of an alternative to quote Freudian analysis. People interested in this, the man with the tape recorder, there was a controversy about this. I think I talked to you about this, about, someone records the session and says the psychoanalyst is cop.
Exactly.
Man with a tape recorder is kind of a movement towards, if you want to look at this, the existential psychoanalysis to anti-psychiatry, right? And openness, and then going into what we ultimately will go into schizoid analysis, right? It may be the last symptom of capital, right, if you will, in terms of mental categories or symptoms that were experienced. That Lang once said, the schizophrenic has the most sane response to capitalism. Yeah, in a sense, right? Yeah, for whatever that's worth, right? Anyway, he mentions this, yeah. Also, great work on ideology. Everybody privileges Althusser, but if you read The Politics of the Family by Lang, you get a deeper understanding of family ideology and family, conflicts and dynamisms. So anyway, this is a step, if you will. I want to go back on the other side of this. We'll go on another parallel to this. We'll go into Freud on narcissism. Just to rehearse this a little bit, the 1940 piece, I want to read this. I may read chapter 7 of Interpretation of Dreams, so just so we can flesh out some of the things we've said about Binswanger and Foucault's interpretation of Binswanger, Foucault's interpretation. So we might read chapter 7. So we'll do this with the Freud, right? And then we'll go to the movement of Lacan, Freud and Lacan together, and see Lacan's, if you will, return to Freud and what that meant and why that was necessary and what he brought to it differently, in my opinion. I think Lacan really saved to my mind, he saved Freud from really basically a kind of normative oblivion. In my he reworked it so creatively and interestingly through the seminars that began in I think 51, if I'm not mistaken. He's kicked out of the international psychoanalytic movement in 1951 with a piece called Discourse on Rome. Yeah. And yeah, and then he did 20, I think 24 years of seminars, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, of course, Lacan had like a good cybernaut or someone interested in science of psychoanalysis that goes back to 1895. Freud considered psychoanalysis a science, right? Yeah. Lacan wanted to mathematically formalize the unconscious. So he had a whole group of people around him. I'll go into that a little bit. I have some documents on stuff like that and do a couple of the Francois Reconte being one of the people that did this. So anyway, but going back to Sartre, again, this father of French existentialism, the popularizer, this was the intellectual as, quote, movie star, the public intellectual being in the media almost every day, right, in a sense. So there was a cult, if you will, a cult. But at the same time, this was very powerful stuff. So if we go back to bad faith, mauvaise foi, and then good faith, and see this dynamic at work, we begin to see, what he's talking about, right, in a sense. And I know that when I said, you choose to be depressed at a certain level, but I think the real choice is to get out of the depression. That's really where it is. It's not really that you choose to be depressed. Yeah.
Yeah.
What were you going to say,
I mean,
Josh? Please.
he kind of expresses that in the freedom and responsibility section, right?
Yes, he does.
The war that you fight in, even if it's not your wars.
That's right. That's right. Good.
It's a great section too.
It's a great section. Yeah. So if you're interested in freedom, this is our man in some ways. Yeah, in a way. Yeah. Marcuse, after reading the Critique of Dialectical Reason, said, yeah, pretty amazing. By the way, the book Existence, which was a paperback of writings from Binswanger to Rollo May and other people of the Eugene Minkowski, people like this, was in Angela Davis's library on her desk all the time back in the day when she was coming up. So this was very prevalent at this time, in a sense. And I always found that, if one begins, instead of essentializing or striving for the essences, right, in a sense, that one is able, if one begins in existence, you have a much better capacity to tear away the veil, tear away what's really happening, right, in some ways, by proceeding that way. By the way, this book, 43, that made him famous, besides Nausea, he gave the talk Existentialism is a Humanism because people wanted to know what the hell this was. So this became the pamphlet called Existentialism. It was given at a club, Club Maintenant, Club Now, in Paris. So thousands of people were there to hear a lecture. Yeah. And 500,000 people attended his funeral. You can't get 20 people. Frank Kirkland, an old friend of mine, passed away about 2 weeks ago or a week ago. And our friend Jeremy Glick went to the funeral. But anyway, I would doubt there are more than 80 to 100 people there. And Franklin Kirkland was one of the best teachers in New York City. Yeah, in philosophy. He was at Hunter College, very, very well educated, as it was advised by Aaron Gervich at the New School. So anyway, this is where we've become. Henri Bergson, by the way, came to the United States Lower Broadway. Nearly 250,000 people showed up to see Bergson. You can't get people to turn off ESPN to hear, just a little analysis of the Iranian war. It's not normative out there today. Yeah, it's very, very sad what we've become. Yeah, in a way. And you can see it, I mean, these things require a lot of work, Yeah, the reading that we're doing, the reading we have, etc. Yeah, yeah. And and we're not encouraged. We're a very anti-intellectual culture once again. So anyway, you want to go into bad faith a little bit, or what do you
Yeah,
what do you think? Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, first of all, you have to remember he's thinking through the Husserlian concept of intentionality here. The consciousness is always consciousness of something, right? We're always conscious of the other in the room. We're consciousness of, the objects in the room. We're consciousness of the site, the scenario, right? In many ways, right? So in a sense. So he has a great formulation here, right? He says, consciousness is a being for whom, in its being, there is consciousness of the nothingness of its being, right? Now,
negation.
yes, exactly. In the case of a prohibition or a veto, for example, the human being negates some future transcendence, right? But this negation is not a constitutive. My consciousness is not limited to merely envisioning a negativity or negativity. It constitutes itself in its flesh as the annihilation. This is important. This is language people don't like today. Annihilation of a possibility projected by some other human reality as its possibility. This translation of human reality is a translation of Heidegger's Dasein. This got into big problems with the Derridians and other people in terms of problems of translation.
Yeah, they should just write that.
This
They
is
should
very
have written
interesting.
Dasein, yeah, it would be less confusing.
Yes, right.
You're on page 86 there?
Yes, I'm on page 86, yeah.
Yeah.
87.
Yeah,
and
that's
Stupid, yeah.
So it should be Dasein instead of human reality, and this is very important, the Dasein. To do that, it must arise in the world as a no, right? So what's the most important word the child learns? No, right? What our culture doesn't do because we're a nanny state. I see this in the academy, in the institutions of higher learning day in, day out, that basically we have created infantilization of academia and also a nanny state in terms of college. You experience this?
Oh,
Yeah, it's unbelievable
They
how
send-
much it's
they send you a
deteriorated.
form.
Yeah, yeah,
They say,
yeah,
fill out this form.
yeah.
They
And-
already have all the
right.
information.
And it's indeed as a no that the slave, and this is the Hegelian move, initially grasps his master, and as a no that the prisoner who is trying to escape grasps the sentry watching over him. There are even some men, guards, supervisors, jailers, etc., whose social reality is uniquely that of a no, who will live and die without having been anything but a no on this earth. Very interesting. And, really, what does it mean to exist? Right? Is really the question here, right? Right? Without this encounter with nothingness. Others who bear this no within this very subjectivity are equally constituted in their human person as a constant negation. No is the meaning and the function of Max Schleyer, another great 19th century philosopher, wrote a book called Ressentiment, Man of Resentment. And there are subtler attitudes such as irony, right? Whose description would take us further into the intimacy of consciousness. In the case of irony, man annihilates, in the unity of a single act, what he advances. He makes you believe something in order not to be believed. He affirms in order to negate, and he negates in order to affirm. He creates a positive object whose being, however, is nothing more than its nothingness. These attitudes, and this is very important, of negation in relation to oneself, therefore enable us to raise a new question. It's very important. What must man be in his being for it to be possible for him to negate himself? But we ought not to take that attitude of self-negation as a universal. The kinds of behavior we clarify under the heading are too diverse. We would run the risk of dealing only with the abstract form. We should choose, right, and examine a specific attitude that is essential to human reality, to design, right, if you will, and in which at the same time, consciousness, instead of directing its negation outward, turns it against itself. And it seemed to us that this attitude must be bad faith. So we're dealing here with a phenomenological attitude. You know, the left has always been problematic in terms of, in my estimation, again, and I don't speak from a position of authority here, just observation, it always has a problem with attitude, right? How does one change attitude, right? In a sense, right? So, but bad faith is also assimilated to lying. We may indifferently say that someone is exhibiting bad faith, right? Or that he is lying to himself. Hence, we are willing to allow that bad faith consists in lying to oneself on condition that lying to oneself is immediately distinguished from lying in all cases, right? We can agree that lying is a negative attitude, but this negation does not bear on consciousness itself. It aims only at something transcendent. Indeed, the essence of the lie implies that the liar is fully aware of the truth he is disguising. We do not lie about something we do not know about. We do not lie in broadcasting a mistake of which one itself is a victim. We do not lie when we get something wrong. The ideal of the liar, then, is a cynic in his consciousness. This is interesting, a cynic in his consciousness who affirms the truth in itself and negates it in his words while negating this negation for himself. The targets of this double negative attitude are transcendent. The stated fact is transcendent since it does not exist, and the first negation applies to a truth, that is, to a specific transcendent type. As to the inner negation, I carry out correlatively to any affirmation of the truth for myself that is applied to words, that is, to say, to an event in the world. In addition, the liar's internal disposition is positive. It may be the object of an affirmative judgment. The liar intends to deceive. And I wanted to say something. To me, Sartrean bad faith was also not only the lie, but it was also the element of self-deception. There was always this deceptive moment that was going on as well. One's fooling oneself in the bad faith, as well as deceiving others.
Yeah.
This double game of self-deception, right? Yeah. Right? And this is rampant in our society.
I mean, it's also it's also knowing the truth that you're lying to yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, that's also the
Yes, of course.
right. That's the
Yes,
so you're lying to yourself and still knowing that you're lying to yourself and still doing a lie.
absolutely. Yeah. And he gives this great example later, and we'll go through this because it's a famous example of the waiter in the cafe.
Yeah.
The waiter is never the waiter in the cafe. The waiter is an actor. The waiter is a public figure, right? Is a graduate student, never the waiter in the cafe in a certain way. Yeah. Yeah. In many ways. So this is very important too. So I want to just say this too. I want us to make distinctions here, and I'll go over this next time more descriptively. The distinctions between sincerity and authenticity,
Yeah.
because sincerity sometimes is in bad faith, where authenticity is an overcoming of the bad faith, right? To live authentic and true to the project, right? Yeah. What's being covered up here always for Sartre is the anxiety and anguish of consciousness. This is it's an evasive technique that is constant. Yeah, you want to say something, Josh?
No, I'm
Please.
just
Yeah.
thinking about
Yeah.
sincerity.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess you're going to do it next week, but
No, go ahead. No,
No,
please.
no, I'm just wondering what the difference is between sincerity and authenticity.
Well, sincerity is the liberal.
Is the liberal, yeah.
To be honest with you, when you really think about this, I feel your pain.
Right.
The liberal.
The neutralization of
The
conflict.
Neutralization of everything,
Yeah, or
in a way,
confrontation.
of conflict. I feel your pain,
Gotcha.
right? In a sense, right?
Yeah.
Never authentic and saying, your pain is absolutely conditioned on this,
Yeah.
and this is what we have to do to get rid of it.
Right, okay.
And in a
The
sense, right?
sincerity of magical thinking.
Yes, exactly. The magical, very well put, in Sartrean terms, Phil, the magical transformation of the world,
Mhm.
too. Yeah, we know better. It's going to go away. We're going to magically transform it. Yeah. The DNC issues a report why Kamala Harris failed. Right. This is a complete example of bad faith and insincerity. Right, in many ways. Right. Yeah. For Sartre, one thing I do like about him very much, psychologically and philosophically, the liberal is really the enemy.
Yeah.
Not the right winger. The liberal is really the enemy. The enemy of bad faith, in bad faith,
Yeah.
is the liberal class.
Absolutely.
And I'm in agreement with him. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm totally in agreement. You see this everywhere. Yeah. From I feel your pain to I understand you have hardship at home. You need 6 more months to finish your paper for the class, right? Right, etc. Yeah, etc. Yeah. And we're creating this more and more. And this is part of the argument that the right wing has, and sometimes effectively out of an authenticity towards the nanny state. Look what we've created, right? In a sense. It's not the welfare state, which had responsibility. The New Deal had some responsibility attached to it. It wasn't a giveaway. It wasn't a childish remark. It was a way of fending off. Sean knows this very well. All of you know this very well. The New Deal was a way of making sure that the communist threat did not take hold in the United States. But along with that came hard responsibility. You went to the WPA, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. And you look at bad faith, and this would be a great paper, in labor studies, is if you go back and you read C. Wright Mills's New Men of Power about labor after World War II and how much power they really had, they were in bad faith. Reuther, all these people, because they could not take power. They were afraid of it. They became class collaborators with the industrial capital. Yeah. Nothing but powerful moment that the working class could have taken up in the 1940s. Instead, we get the fair deal of Harry S. Truman, give him hell, Harry, et cetera. We get all these moments here in the 50s, et cetera. And then you begin to see the attack on labor in the big way with the steel strike in the 1960s, right? All the way going up to Reagan. Reagan wasn't the one busting the unions. The unions were busting themselves in some ways. It's really true, to my mind, because of this lack of feeling the authenticity of power, being able to take it. Yeah, being able to take it in many ways. So I think there's a lot in here to work with, in a way. The self-deception, that somehow this myth, magical thinking, going back to what Phil was talking about. Oh, yes, our day will come. The proletariat will get justice. We just have to sweat it out. We'll go on strike once in a while, et cetera, right? I'm not trying to be glib about this, but I think there's something to be said about the actions, right, in these kind of contexts, what really happens. I mean, yeah. And the worst class is the academic class, the most petite bourgeois class out there in the worst sense. I'm sorry. I can go on and on about this, to put it mildly. Okay? Yeah.
There's an interesting book actually about well, it's a scathing review of Western Marxism by this guy Gabriel Rockhill. And I mean, he's really angry. But he really does. He illuminates how a lot of the Western Marxist theoreticians were paid by the CIA and the State Department.
Yeah, I mean, look, again, with all due respect to Rockhill and his master, Domenico Lasorda, who wrote the book on Western Marxism, look, Herbert Marcuse may have taken money from a foundation that had Rockefeller in the name, etc. But to claim that these people were agents of imperialism is a far stretch to my mind and has no backup in terms of evidence, in a sense. So if the Simons Foundation comes to the Institute for Radical Imagination and says, we want to give you $1 million to promote your stuff, I'm going to take the check.
Yeah, we're gonna
I'm not going to say your daddy was a Wall Street, operative who figured out algorithmic possibilities in trading stocks. I mean, I just want to say this with all due respect. I see the point, I see the tendencies, and at one level, I agree with Rockhill about what it's become in the academy. How this theory, and going back to some of Sean's resistance to Foucault and others, in a sense, that this kind of theorization in the institutions really took away from practical problems, took away from an analysis of the global South, an analysis of the working class. There was this kind of disconnect. And Catherine Liu is very good on this too, by the way. If you know Catherine Liu, who's at
Yeah.
UCal Santa Barbara, who used to be at the Graduate Center, who grew up with all this theory. I knew her when she was a toddler in graduate. I'm just teasing, but anyway. Anyway,
Look,
go ahead, please. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, yeah.
I don't think that Rockhill was he didn't really do much of a critique of the ideas
That's
of
right.
some of those people. But and
Good
I don't
point.
think so. I don't think that he was trying to say that Marcuse is an agent or anything like that.
Right, right.
I think that he was just trying to present an analysis of the post-war era and the imperative that the U.S. felt that,
Yeah.
oh my God, look at the power of these communist parties, the influence of the communist parties in Western Europe. And forget about the Soviet Union. Look at what's going on in Western Europe. So anything that they could support that was critical of the Soviet Union, of Soviet Marxism,
No,
right?
that's a good
Even, they wanted to support that and to bring that in there, to bring
point.
it into American universities. And John Hopkins, he has this whole big thing about this conference to bring in the French, French modern postmodernism or whatever. It's sort of bankrolled. It's not that they
1966, Sean.
right. It's not like they're
1966.
saying that these people are on a payroll, but it's like they view this as a way to influence people away from communism, from
Yes.
Marxism, Leninism, from the Soviet Union. I think that was his point. It was how
Well,
these
but
had
at
to
the
be
same
good
time,
process.
the Marcuses of the world, right, stimulated great groups in reading capital, right, and in many ways. The Adorno was a teacher in Frankfurt of Angela Davis, right, etc. You created all these very high-powered, left intellectuals such as Hans-Jürgen Kroll, who's completely forgotten as a dialectical thinker, but is a great dialectical thinker to go back to, in a way. And yeah, so anyway, part of the problem is what Rockhill does. I mean, look, again, I understand that there was the anti-Soviet tendency from Castiaradas to Adorno to Marcuse, etc. Marcuse wrote a study called Soviet Marxism. I've read it. And if you're pro-Soviet at that time, pro-USSR, you see this as a scathing attack that could have been commissioned by the State Department. But and it's not. But at the same time, the question was the Soviet Union during this period a bureaucratic machine rather than really a communist machine in terms of the original ideas? So these are the kind of questions that are kind of left out, right?
And those,
What is meant by this idea of communism or the party and its role? And you mentioned Western Europe. Yes, of course. I mean, being Greek, I know the Civil War cold, right? In a sense, and I have family on both sides of this. Still, when we get together, there's arguments about the brothers killing brothers and all of this. But in a way, the operations that went on in Western Europe are very well known. Operation Gladio to keep Italy from becoming, the thing. There's a very good book, by the way, by Daniel Ganser, a Swiss person, called NATO's Secret Enemies, right? Yeah, right, in a way. And it's very interesting about how these operations took place and the names of the operations. But let me just say this, in some ways, the Derridian moment, the Foucaultian moment, all of these moments were attempts to understand language politically, the politics of language. And, when you're reading the world, you want to know what the operation is. So when Gayatri Spivak says the operation that's being deconstructed here, and listen, I'm not trying to promote Gayatri Spivak, but she's paid her dues, in her way. She's really pointing to CIA operations and the language that's being used. So there's a lot of power here that gets displaced in terms of this analysis, in a way. Are you not to take a Guggenheim Fellowship? Because the Guggenheim family were Anaconda Copter Company. They exploited the Chilean people, right? In a sense, right? Even though one of the inheritors was very responsible for keeping the jazz world going, giving money, supporting these guys, et cetera, et cetera.
Rockhill works for a Catholic institution.
Yes,
What are we
right.
doing?
Yeah, yeah. And then look, if you get into this kind of battle, think about the argument. If you're with Gabriel Rockhill, and again, I have nothing against the guy. I met him for the first time about 2 months ago and talked to him, et cetera. But if you say, look, you work for Villanova University, a privileged position, et cetera, et cetera. Where does your money come from? Well, who finances your institute in Paris every summer? In a sense. So to me, there's not an argument there. That's part of the problem. Yeah. Unless it's marshaled, as you say, Sean, to be totally anti-communist, right? In the progressive sense of the word, right? I mean, just to my thinking. Yeah, in a sense. Yeah. So
Well, there is something to be said when you're trying to understand the malaise that we're in the current situation right now, and sort of like people use the phrase controlled opposition to describe like a lot of the so-called left institutions that exist in the United States.
I agree with you. I like that term.
But when you look at the controlled opposition, a lot of people sort of, it's like follow the money kind of thing, and there's a certain basis. I don't think that in itself settles the question. It is much, you have to go deeper. And the reason why I'm interested in Sartre is because when you talked about existentialism, that he had this idea of somehow combining existentialism or the insights of existentialism with Marxism.
Yes.
That's a very interesting concept, because when you look at the history of Marxism, it's been like the conflict between the individual and the collective in these various parties and states has
Yes.
been a disaster.
Yes.
Right? That's sort of like, you want to look at the fuck up? Well, it goes right around there. So if we can understand better the individual and the struggle with,
Yes.
the individual and the larger group, that dynamic, and understand that thing, that seems to me a pretty useful line of inquiry,
I agree with you completely. And by the way, Sartre, just speaking of Sartre and Soviet Marxism, Sartre refused the Nobel Prize. He would not take it. He considered it a bourgeois prize. He won the Nobel Prize. He also won the Lenin Peace Prize. But guess what he gave a lecture on when he went to Moscow to get the Lenin? He gave a lecture on Kafka and bureaucracy, right? The same thing in some ways that Kastiaravas and Marcuse were criticizing about the USSR. But he did it in subtle ways. It's very interesting when you begin to dig deeper here, in a sense, right? In many ways. Yeah, yeah. So anyway, you won't find anybody more pro-Soviet than me, especially between 1917 to 1929, if you will, right? In terms of the creative flourishes that happened. between Eisenstein, Vertov, the literary critics, the philosophical work that went on, the Leninist break, all of these things, in a sense. But then the question is, what went wrong, right? How did we get to 1989, right, in a sense? And this is still a good question because it's not.
Yeah.
Now, go ahead. I'm listening. Yeah.
You can ask the same question about what went wrong with all those great minds in Germany in the 1920s and 30s, because look what happened, right? You could ask that same question.
Oh, you're absolutely right.
No, it's
And German expressionism, the German film. Look at Fritz Lang, Metropolis to the Blue Angel. Yeah. Pretty amazing. Yeah, what went on. Yeah. I think the greatest testament of capitalism and Nazism together is a study of Dr. Mabuse, the three parts, right? Yeah, of Fritz Lang. It really tells you exactly about Nazism and its relationship to capital and big business. And ultimately, what Foucault says was the attempt to wither away the state in the name of a worldwide conspiracy, which I think we're living through today, too, in a certain way. Trump doesn't care, only the use of the state, right, for, rulers, etc. at this point. Yeah. He's shredding the state time and time again. Yeah.
Well, that's the whole philosophy of neoliberalism.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And it's extreme form now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's extreme form. But we need people, again, Sean, I just want to emphasize, we need people like Foucault to give us lectures in what ordoliberalism was in the German sense, and how this morphs into American liberalism and morphs into neoliberalism. Because he's looking at documents that make this possible and schools that make this possible. So for me, if you really want to understand the United States today, read the Harvard Business School review. You want to understand class, labor, capital relations, read the Harvard Business Review again, right? How does this come down to really policy that's going on the other side, right? Yeah, we all know how management thinks in a way, but we don't know what new techniques they have, how they're thinking about stuff, where the rhetoric is, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. And what does a good contract mean today? The workers have been completely overcome by my union at LIU. They look at me like I'm crazy when I proposed a retroactive bonus to bring things up from inflation, right? The cost of living, to bring up real wages instead of nominal wages. They look at me, what are you talking about? They're not going to give us a retroactive. I said, you have to ask for it. Yeah. What's wrong with you? Yeah.
what are you gonna give up to get that? That's what they tell you.
That's the next question. What do we give up?
How are they going to pay for that? What are you going to give up to pay for that?
Exactly. They're going to cut our salaries to do this, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Start thinking
Exactly.
Start thinking.
So yeah, no, it's very important. Yeah. So anyway, I'm glad you bring up. Listen, he tries to bridge the gap, Sartre, because he was under pressure from the left. Sartre was never a member of the Communist Party. He was always a fellow traveler, but also an outsider, always, because he had an independent mind, right? In his way, I think. And, but you're right. He tried to resolve, if you will, the question of the existential, right, with that of quote unquote class struggle and the collective. He really tried to resolve that question, right? And these were people that were thinking this through. And, Sartre knew Lukács. Merleau-Ponty knew Lukács. This was the beginning. And Rockhill, in some ways, I read Lasorda's book on Western Marxism, which is kind of the backdrop to the Rockhill trilogy here. There is this attempt to look at, that Lukács, in some ways was the wind from the east, right, in a sense, even though he's really the beginning of Western Marxism. It's really strange. He actually throws out in history class consciousness. What does Marxism refer to? What does it mean? Orthodox Marxism is method, right? It's the dialectical attempt to look at the mode of presentation is different from the mode of research, right? And when you get those two methods down, you begin to really start thinking dialectically. He understood this very, very well. And you see it in his writing, right? Yeah. And yeah. But again, maybe I've been blinded by the Stalinist moment. Again, I'm not negative on Stalin and I'm not positive. I try to weigh it in terms of its historical necessity. But anyway, all to say, Lukács missed a lot of the experimental work in fiction, which was very prophetic. He went the way of social realism. And he came up finally after he saw what went on during the show trials and afterwards. He said, after all, Kafka's a realist. This is what he said. Kafka is a realist. So Kafka plays an important role here in terms of the trial, the castle, in the penal colony, all of these moments, very important. Maybe the writer we should go back to, alongside, of course, the epic figures such as Melville and Faulkner and Joyce and Proust, etc. Yeah, yeah. That Franz is very, yeah. I remember always hearing the knock on the door the first time I read the trial. This door's for you. I would hear the knock. They're coming for me. That's when I was so, terrified, I guess, of what he was really talking about, their process, right? This door is only for you, right? In a sense, which is, again, going back to Sartre, the problem of nothingness, right? This is what we deny, right? In a way, in terms of existentially. Yeah, right? Yeah. In Heideggerian terms, being towards death. In Sartrean terms, the denial of nothingness and the inability to face anguish, responsibility, and freedom, to my mind. And this is what produces consistent bad faith. And why we are where we are. Because, these leaders in Congress, they think they're fucking, excuse my language, immortal. Right? Yeah. They're so corrupt that they have no understanding of what legacy they're leaving or what they're doing at this point. This is what the system has come to, right? In a way. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. And how blind it is. You just look at the two results in Kentucky and Texas. You got to follow this stuff because it affects us in our everyday life, right? In a way. So Corbyn gets slaughtered because of MAGA and Trump's support of this criminal Paxton, right, in Texas, right? Massey gets slaughtered in Kentucky because he dared to go against Trump. So you got to ask yourself, what kind of presence does this have? This cult called Trumpism, or whatever you want to call it, the Trumpocene, right? In a way, yeah. How did it get to this point? Yeah. And obviously, people aren't thinking about mortality. They're not thinking about climate change, nuclear war, or AI. What will AI do to labor ultimately? How many? How employers think, Sean. They're sitting around right now in academia. Well, let me see. We can take these courses, right? And we can generate AI on these courses, and we can eliminate 20 tenured professors this way. Right? This is the way they think. Yeah. And then you go to the stupid departmental, we have to embrace this. We have to learn how to use this. Please hug it. Let's be sweet now. Yeah.
That's the process of training that's going on.
Exactly. Michael, please don't be disruptive. Yeah. Control yourself. I know all the code words now, of course. Right. Yeah.
So I would just point out.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I would just point out that I used to play sports when I was a kid, and they had this thing, when you're playing football, it's like, you have the two lines, and it's called the mind fuck. In other words, before the ball is even hiked, you're talking trash to the person opposite you.
Right.
So that they're already mentally defeated. And I think that this is before the ball is hiked. And I think there's a certain amount of that going on with AI, that, this disaster scenario, the Borg in Star Trek has arrived, and, we're all about to be swept up into this total, totally controlled environment. But the fact is, when you look at these so-called like AI battle plans and AI, it doesn't work too well.
No.
You want to bomb something, and you have Hegseth is using AI to like have to plan out these attacks, and you end up bombing, like, killing these children and young women. That's your big attack. It's like, because you don't even know what you're shooting at. You're just relying on AI to program your raids. It's like, it's not the great, takeover that they try to present it as. It's a loser in a lot of ways.
Well, I understand that, but the problem again is the consequences. There are no consequences for this. There's no national war tribunal or assassin teams to take care of these people that are promoting this at this point.
Well, the United States has to be totally defeated.
I'm sorry?
The U.S. has to be totally defeated, which they will be.
Okay.
They will be defeated.
Okay.
And then there'll be some trials, and then there'll be some heads rolling. But I think that's going to happen in the not too distant future.
I certainly hope you're right, but
all I'm saying is, don't be awed by this technology.
no, I'm not awed. I'm certainly not awed by it. I just know that the commitment and the level that's going into this, and I sit in on departmental meetings in which it's promoted, and then you have to go to training sessions and all this bullshit. I spent 3 hours just on a training session in workplace violence, how to deal with if there's an active shooter. And finally I figured out, just go to the questions, Michael. The premises of everything. So I just skipped everything and went to the questions so I could finish this nonsense. The same thing with sexual harassment, right? The same thing. And now cyberbullying is the next thing that we have to do. So this is all extra labor, Sean, that's going on.
They're just tying themselves up in the knots.
I tell
think
them
of
I'd
like
rather be reading Adorno or even Gabriel Rockhill for that matter. Yeah.
it reminds me of that movie Brazil. You ever see that movie Brazil, where nothing
I did.
works? The future,
Yes.
nothing
Right.
really works.
Right.
In this
Right.
advanced
Okay.
society.
Okay. Okay, good. All right. So listen, let's pick up next week. We'll go over bad faith. Please read the section. It's only 30-something pages. I'll try to bridge it to existential psychoanalysis. I'll try to develop the distinction between authenticity and sincerity, and also the notion of, if you will, of how this feeds the liberal, the bad faith, right? And how this class acts this way, this liberal class, or what Catherine Liu calls the virtue hoarders. I think this is a very good example of consistent bad faith. The professional managerial class, what's called the PMC. Yeah, just to use it as an example. Yeah. So we'll do that next week. So we'll either all be online or we'll be back in near hybrid. I'm not sure yet, depending on how things are, for me, vis-a-vis my recovery, as well as Montreal situation. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. Okay.
How are you feeling?
I feel much better, thank you. Yeah. It was a rough one, though. It was upper respiratory with a little bit of laryngitis and a lot of coughing. And when you get to, I'm not 25 anymore. I think I am sometimes, but anyway, the body doesn't recover from all the coughing and what stresses it's going through. So you think you're back, but you're not really back, because the bounce, isn't in the foot yet, in the gait yet. Yeah, but I'm getting there. I'm almost there. I don't wish this on anyone. It must be a very virulent stream of a virus. I think I picked it up in Montreal in a club. So yeah, who knows? Yeah, but again, you get it. It's out there. But going to Greece, I'm wearing a mask on the plane. No question about that. Yeah. Yeah, I'm with myself. But yeah, should be in top shape next week. Yeah, and yeah. So we'll go over bad faith. I want us to really understand this concept, and I want to then apply it to psychoanalysis too. Yeah, to think about it in this way, because this is a bridge, if you will, to freedom, responsibility, and to the psychoanalytic moment too. Yeah, yeah. So hopefully we can see that. Yeah. So Walter Reuther was in bad faith, right?
Well, he paid for it.
Yes, indeed. He paid for it. That's correct. That's very good. Yeah, yeah. Okay, everybody have a good week. Okay, nice to see everybody. See you next week. Okay, and Beryl
Thanks, Michael.
will get you everything together. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.